Before we start, if everyone would like to put themselves on mute, please, unless you're one of the speakers for the moment. Thank you. So, a warm welcome to the launch of CIPD's Working Lives Northern Ireland report, which is our first, and I think it's the first, comprehensive analysis of job quality in Northern Ireland, which will provide a framework for measuring job quality across the 7 different dimensions that we use within the CIPD. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lee Panglia and I head up the CIPD in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. I work with a great team of staff and volunteers to deliver a whole series of networks and communities to support our members in the HR profession across Northern Ireland. So today, I'm delighted to introduce 2 speakers to our session today. My colleague Marek Zemanik, who is our Senior Public Policy Advisor and who authored the report, and Marek will share its findings. And also Henderson Group's HR Director, Sam Davidson, and I'm delighted to welcome Sam today, and Sam will explore what this means in practice. So you could probably tell how happy I am, how delighted I am to be launching this report today. For some time we've discussed the importance of having our own Northern Ireland specific evidence, and now we have it. And I'm delighted to say it's been picked up by the media. And so you'll be reading about the report and the findings in the press. And also Marek, you may share later with you, will be on the news at tea time tonight on the BBC News. So our purpose at CIPD is to champion better work and working lives, to create good work for the benefit of individuals, employers, the economy, society. And to do this depends on public policymakers having the evidence they need to design those interventions which help or encourage employers to tackle the big workplace issues. This provides some of this evidence. The last 20 months have been extraordinary for all of us, but especially for our profession, for the HR profession. We've been front and centre of navigating all the huge people and organisational challenges across Northern Ireland. But as we look towards the new normal, we must all learn lessons from the pandemic and ensure that it's a catalyst for change. Good people practice should be at the centre, should be central to achieving this. And our report that Marek will share with you provides crucial evidence around some of the challenges that we face, the gaps, but also the opportunities for progress. But I will stop talking now because I'm in danger of stealing Marek's thunder by sharing with you some of the report's findings, and I don't want to do this. So before I introduce Marek and Sam, I just wanted to run through a couple of practical aspects. You've all joined the session in mute. I think most of you are still on mute. So please keep yourself on mute while the presentation is taking place. I'm going to introduce Marek as the first speaker, and then he will introduce Sam, and we will have some time at the end for questions. It's an informal discussion, so please do post your observations, your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as possible. The session is being recorded for those who are unable to join us today. And we promise not to run over the 60 minutes allocated to the session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Marek. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you all for joining us this lunchtime for what will hopefully be and an interesting session for you all. First, I feel I have to apologize for the state of my voice. It seems the primordial soup of nursery and school bugs has claimed the victim in this household. But hopefully it will hold up at least for the next 60 minutes or so. Here's what we want to cover today. I'll talk a little bit about job quality in general. Why is it that we're talking about it? What it means? How do we measure it? And then I'll run through some of the findings of Working Lives Northern Ireland, which is the report that we are launching today. A very exciting day because we've been talking about this for months, if not years, actually, and it's just delighted. I'm delighted to finally see it published. So I think I'll be doing probably a bit more of the researchy, academic-y side of things, which is why I'm really delighted to have Sam join us here today, because Sam will be talking about job quality from a sort of practitioner point of view, talking about some of the experiences of his employees throughout the pandemic, what interventions they put in place, for example, and what that all means for the future, which is probably the most important bit of all. Okay, I'll just kick off then very quickly. As Lee said, please, any comments or any questions, just pop them in the chat, and we'll try and cover as many of them as possible at the end of the session. And if we can't get to them, then we can, of course, always follow up after the session as well. So I thought I would start with a sort of big picture outline of job quality. Why is it that we speak about job quality and why is it important? Now, the very basic reason for why the CIPD talks about job quality is because, well, it is actually our purpose. As you can see here in our logo, championing better work and working lives is what we do. So making sure that people's experiences at work are positive and that they have a positive relationship to other aspects of employees' lives. It's something that we're trying to do. This also means that it's a sort of key research area for us. It's a key public policy area for us, but it's also something that is ingrained in all sorts of guidance and sort of practitioner advice that we do as well. Now, of course, the question is, why do we focus on job quality? Well, I already mentioned individual well-being is, of course, a big part of that. But there's increasing amounts of evidence that there's another aspect why we should be focusing on job quality, and that is productivity. Now, you will have heard of the so-called productivity puzzle, which is this sort of almost mystery for why the UK's, actually Northern Ireland is even slightly worse than the UK as a whole, why our productivity is lagging behind some of our key competitors, like not just the United States across the pond, but I think countries like France or Germany, for example, as well. And there's increasing amounts of evidence that actually job quality, and in particular good people management, is extremely important for an employee's productivity. Now, if we can improve an employee's productivity, that of course then improves the business's productivity. And if we can improve the productivity of many, many businesses, especially some of the smallest businesses across Northern Ireland, well, that will have an impact on the productivity of the country as a whole. So there are some clear implications here for both public policy, but also of practice, some which I hope we'll be able to cover today. Now, it's not just us that have been talking about job quality and its importance to productivity. Policymakers in general across the UK have started to realize and notice that these things are actually very important. Some of the highlights here on this slide. Obviously, Matthew Taylor's review of modern working practices that was published in 2017 was a big step towards trying to improve some of these job quality dimensions across the UK, mostly across the GB because of employment law. But even before Matthew Taylor's review, we had the Fair Work Convention set up in Scotland in 2016 that has conceptualized fair work and what it might mean, and that's been sort of guiding public policy in Scotland ever since then. There's various sort of regional charters that have sprung up as well since then, most famously probably the Good Work Standard in London, Good Employment Charter in Manchester. There's others currently being developed in, for example, Liverpool and other areas as well. But this is becoming more important in a Northern Irish context as well. Belfast City Council are currently working on what they call the Inclusive Growth City Charter. That covers more dimensions than just sort of job quality, but in general is trying to improve employees' experiences in work through sort of voluntary agreements with businesses signing up to a charter. Now, to take it one step further, the executive has actually announced, the Department for the Economy has announced that it intends to introduce what they call the Better Jobs Pledge. Now, that will be a lot more significant measure, which is targeted at medium and large businesses, which will be required to sign up to a series of work quality, job quality metrics in order to receive public funding, or even to be able to participate in certain procurement processes as well. Now, to that end, NISTRA, which is the Northern Irish Statistics Agency, is actually working on a series of work quality metrics as well, and has been doing that for a while with the sort of work plan coming forward. So this is a really exciting and important time to be talking about job quality in Northern Ireland and across the UK as well. And we really hope that this report will make a good, positive, meaningful contribution to this debate. Now, the CIPD, for our part, we conceptualized good work maybe 5 years ago now, and our report, Working Life Northern Ireland, is written around these 7 dimensions that you can see on your screen just now. I think most obviously, if you ask any sort of normal employee who's not that interested in academic research, what would make a good job for them, I think the top 2 here would probably be high on the agenda there. Pay and benefits, of course, and contracts. Important thing to highlight here on pay and benefits. We're not just looking at objective pay, so we're not just looking at the levels of somebody's salary or their hourly rate, but we're looking at also things like subjective feelings about pay. So whether employees feel that they are getting paid appropriately for the work that they do, which is also extremely important. Now, beyond pay and benefits and contracts, if you look at some of the other dimensions here, many of them became even more important, of course, throughout the pandemic. Work-life balance, job design, so nature of work, things like workloads, job autonomy, skills match, overqualification, etc. Relationships at work, extremely important. In fact, one of the most important dimensions of job quality, if past research is to be believed as well. Employee voice and representation is another one. And of course, health and well-being. So 7 dimensions. We've got about 30, I think, sub dimensions and about 90 or so questions in the survey. Now, before you start switching your computers off, I will not be going through 40 different graphs and 90 different questions. What I really want to do is I just wanted to sort of highlight some of the most interesting or most important aspects from the report. You're very welcome to look at the full report, which is very easily available on our website as well. And of course, very happy to answer any follow-up questions from anything that's not covered in this presentation. Right, I'll just keep cracking on then and talk about Working Lives Northern Ireland. Now, just in terms of a bit of a background, the basis for this report actually lies in what we have been doing UK-wide for many years now. Our sort of annual flagship job quality report is called the Good Work Index, which we've been publishing every year since 2017. Now, the survey that we use, the 95 questions that I just mentioned that underpins this, is the same survey, roughly, that we used for Working Lives Northern Ireland as well. Since 2020, we've been doing a sort of Scottish supplement as well, and then during the pandemic, we've been doing what we called COVID Working Lives, where we use a sort of shorter version of the survey to track how people's experiences at work have changed month on month in 2020. So Working Lives Northern Ireland, I think the best way to think of this is as a snapshot of job quality in Northern Ireland. It's obviously based on a survey that's weighted to be representative of working adults in Northern Ireland. So it's all statistically sound. The one thing I did want to highlight is that I am not going to be doing any comparisons with Scotland or with the UK-wide figures. And of course, I don't have any longitudinal data to be able to compare the findings from this year to any previous years or anything like that. The reason why I can't compare this with the Scottish or the UK-wide data is because the survey was taken in August and not in January as the other ones. And we know that actually the month during which you ask questions can impact on some of the answers quite significantly. Not just in terms of how many people have been working from home in August compared to, for example, January, but also in terms of how people feel about their jobs, how they feel about their mental health, etc., etc. So very much a one-off exploration of job quality as it was, as we find it in August 2021. What's the purpose of it? Well, as I said, unique snapshot of job quality, but it tries to highlight, I guess, the inequalities and trade-offs between various different types of employees and different types of occupations in Northern Ireland. But it also tries to provide a little bit of insight into some of the experiences of employees during the pandemic as well. And the whole point of it is, hopefully, HR practitioners like you, employers, policymakers that we will be speaking to as early as tomorrow, in fact, will be able to take some of the evidence and then use it in their own work, how they, for example, approach certain initiatives or how this might influence legislation, even at the sort of macro level. In terms of some of the headlines that we've found, unsurprisingly and very much in line with previous research, we know that occupation is still the most important driver of somebody's job quality. And of course, you can define occupations in many different ways. What we do in this report is we use the so-called Standard Occupational Classification 2020, which is an ONS metric, which basically categorizes employees in 9 different occupations. And then we look at the differences in experiences between these occupations, and we do see that there are very significant inequalities between occupations when it comes to job quality. Now that of course means that there's been a very different pandemic impact to various occupations. You know, we know that the vast majority of those working in professional occupations or managerial and official occupations can and indeed did work from home during the pandemic. Those on the other end of the scale in sort of elementary occupations or in caring or leisure, etc., could not. And that just highlights that the pandemic will have had a very different impact on different occupations. Now, of course, there is a very clear link between occupations and salary levels. So basically, when you look at the data, you will see that better paid jobs tend to have better job quality outcomes as well. But it would be a bit too simplistic to say that better paid jobs are better jobs across all dimensions, because there are some very clear trade-offs when it comes to better paid jobs. And we do know that some of these higher occupations report higher workloads, higher stress, and poorer work-life balance, for example, that comes across quite strongly in the data. So occupation is very, very important, but there are other very important factors as well. Of course, all these protected characteristics like gender or age or disabilities, they will impact on an employee's job quality as well. We know women, for example, are much more likely to work part-time. Older workers, for example, we see report much lower skills development opportunities, or employees with disabilities saying that they are much more likely to go to work despite not feeling well enough to do so, something that we call presenteeism. Organizational size is quite important as well. Very strongly comes across in things like employee voice, where employees in the smallest of businesses are much less likely to say that they have good opportunities for voice. Now that includes things like even one-to-one meetings with managers or team meetings. That's a real sort of gap that I think can be quite easily filled. Caring responsibilities, unsurprisingly, a very significant impact on job quality as well, for example, in around work-life balance. And of course, tenure as well. So the length of time that somebody spends with an organization. And we see that, you know, employees with longer tenures are much more likely to say that they have a lot more job autonomy, for example. Pretty logical. Okay, now when we start cross-referencing some of these job quality dimensions, we will see that there's a very strong link between all these job quality dimensions and things like job satisfaction. And that seems quite straightforward, of course. If you feel that your job is a better job, you'll be happier with your job. But it's not just job satisfaction. We also see very clear links to things like task performance and contextual performance. Task performance being whether you are you achieve the tasks in your job, for example, whether you feel competent enough, whether you do the job that you're meant to do. But contextual performance, things like whether you go above and beyond your job, whether you help your colleagues when they are, for example, struggling. So that's a very clear link and some evidence that productivity will be impacted by improving job quality. We also see what's called job quality clustering and trade-offs. The trade-offs I already mentioned. By job quality clustering, I mean that what tends to happen, good jobs tend to get better across most dimensions, and then of course vice versa as well. Now, of course, I think that's the key message from this report. This does not have to be inevitable, and there are some steps that practitioners and policymakers can take to try and make these things better across all different occupations. If I look at some of the sort of key challenges that we've identified in the report, we see employees struggle with workloads. So 40% of all employees, which is quite staggeringly high, say that their workloads are too high. So this is work intensity rather than working hours. This is the intensity of your workload. 40% say it's too high. We see some evidence of underemployment. So 12% of our employees say they would like to work more hours per week than they currently do. Some concerning findings around work and its impact on health. We've got 31% saying that work negatively impacts their mental health, for example, almost a third. Same proportion report quite concerningly around work-life balance. So they 31% say that they can't relax in their personal lives because of their job. Some differences in skills development opportunities. As I mentioned, older workers much less likely to be able to say that they can develop their skills in work. And then, of course, flexible working gaps as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more, I'm pretty sure, later. We have seen a big increase in home working in the last 20 months or so. But actually official statistics, and it's reflected in our survey as well, show that the other options, the other flexible working options, have actually flatlined or in fact even decreased. And I think, we have kept saying this and will continue to say this: flexible working is not the same as working from home. It's very important that employers and practitioners in our profession keep pushing for alternative solutions as well and other forms of flexibility. Yeah. Of course, one of the things that we did want to look at in the survey was the impact of COVID and whether we can see any sort of evidence of that. And in order to do that, we analyzed two different groups of employees. We looked at home workers, so those who are forced to work from home because of the pandemic, and compared those with non-home workers. And then we looked at key workers as well and their experiences of job quality. And some of the differences I just wanted to run through because I think this is quite interesting. And certainly when we've done this UK-wide and in Scotland, this was the bit that was of most interest. I think the first thing to emphasize around home working is that there's a big difference between home working by choice and home working that's mandated by law. You can see that it has not been a universally positive experience for everybody. People are forced to work from home even if they didn't want to or didn't have the premises to do so, for example. And there are some clear challenges with that. However, we do see some interesting and perhaps surprising actually positives when we compare home workers to non-home workers. For example, they are much more positive about the quality of their relationships with managers and the quality of how management responded to the pandemic. They also respond more positively around things like employee voice, which I personally found interesting. But it might just be a bit of evidence that some of the interventions that our profession put in place, focusing on communication, focusing on making sure that employees are up to date, they have actually had an impact on these metrics. On the other hand, we see home workers report poorer relationships with their colleagues, which might not really come as a surprise, but I also report much more negative impacts of work on health, in particular physical health, for example, the lack of movement, not even losing your commute, walking towards your bus, walking towards your car, and just sitting behind your desk, that will have an impact. I mentioned the flexibility thing and working from home. It's all very well to focus on working from home. We've got 32% of jobs that simply cannot be done from home. So it's very important that we focus on other forms of flexibility there as well. Now, when you ask employees how they would like to continue to work once all the pandemic restrictions are lifted, this is what we found. This is the only graph I'm going to show you. I promise. There's another 39 of them in the report. But what we see here is that for those who can work from home, the preference is very clearly a form of hybrid working. So some sort of mixture between working from home and going into the office. So for everybody, you see 41% of all employees would like to work from home some of the time. Most amusingly, I think those currently working from home all the time, even for those, the preference is hybrid, as you can see. But only 3% of those who currently work from home all the time would like to go back to the office full time. On the key worker front, just very briefly, because I'm rapidly running out of time. Unsurprisingly, I think we see there's a big gap between clapping for carers and then the reality of their job quality. 39%, so 2/5 of key workers feel that they are not appropriately paid. And that's, of course, we know that the objective salary difference is lower as well, given the nature of those occupations. But generally, across all the job quality dimensions, we find that they have poorer job quality. Got higher workloads there, more likely to say that they are under excessive pressure, more likely to say that they go to work despite not feeling well enough to do so. There is one key exception, and that is probably no surprise, as in the answer to this question, which is, I have the feeling of doing useful work for society. Much more likely to feel that they are in meaningful jobs than those in non-key worker roles. Okay, very last slide for me. I would just say, we, I think, are still yet to see what the direct impact of the pandemic is going to be on job quality. We know COVID is still very much with us. We need to see whether the labor market recovery that we have seen in the last sort of few months, whether that holds out as we go through the winter months, with the situation getting slightly more concerning. And then, of course, as these sort of future ways of working are embedded, what that then means for job quality for all employees. I think that's still, the jury is still out there. Some of the challenges that have been well described over the last few years, we still see them. We see them in this report as well. Levels of overqualification, skills mismatches, concerning findings around well-being and presenteeism as well. And then the sort of particular challenges for those with caring responsibilities, disabilities, particular challenges for female employees as well. But of course, in a post-pandemic world, new challenges as well, dangers of a two-tier workforce, with some who are able to work from home and others who are not able to work from home. I think it's something that Sam might cover in his section. New challenges when it comes to maintaining relationships, maintaining employee voice, and again focus on well-being as well, and then sort of underlying job design issues, which have really barely changed during the pandemic when it comes to things like job complexity or job autonomy. So just very last message is, we need to speak to employees, learn from their experience, and make sure that communication is at the heart of any sort of future decisions that are being made when it comes to organizations. I will now hand over to Sam, who will be able to talk a little bit about the experiences of the Henderson Group and what he's taken from the last 20 months into the next 20 months. Thank you.
Okay, Marek, thank you very much. Really interesting survey. A first, as you have said. So I guess as practitioners, one thing that we all know about surveys is there's context around any point in time. And I don't know if we'll ever be sure that we've got out of this pandemic, or that we won't wake up one morning and it'll all be over. So I'm sure that that's worth coming back to on a regular basis and testing those feelings and some of the dynamics around them. I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the perspectives from my own practitioner experience with the team today. I've kept the slides deliberately light so we can get hopefully enough conversation, take some questions, because I'm sure we've got many different companies being represented out there in different sectors, and the impacts will be very different, I'm sure. Henderson Group, I imagine most of you will know of it. We're a large, just over 4,600 staff at the moment, large family business in Northern Ireland. We're food centred, so we operate the convenience retail brands of Spar and Vivo and things like Eurospar as well. And we also have a food service business. So we are a big supplier, one of the largest suppliers on the island to catering establishments of all sorts, hospitality, public sector contracts, right down to small food outlets. So I think one of the features that we've had spread over 101 stores, more than 4,500 people during the last 18 to 20 months, is that out of that total workforce, actually less than 15% of the workforce have not been required to come into the place that they normally worked. So whilst it's quite a core group, the disruption is obviously real. We've very much in the majority been an essential worker, an essential sector, and that aspect of keeping two constituencies aligned there is a very important one for us. Always has been. But none more so than over the last 20 months or so. So what I wanted to do, just as a lead into our views about how working frameworks can work in the future, is just to share with you some survey feedback that we've had. So over the course of the last 18 months, we've made sure that we've regularly kept in touch with our team to assess how they're feeling. A lot of that's been local communication, but the last group-wide pulse survey that we ran was back at the end of Q1. Maybe Marek, you'd be able just to bring up the next slide there. And this is a group-wide slide. 83% of all staff gave us feedback. The participation was driven very much by the lack of demographic feedback that participants were required to give. So unfortunately, I can't break it down into sectoral feedback, but we do have it by department. That's an overall set of figures which we were pleased at 12 months into the pandemic. If you consider those that are continuing to come to work as normal, if I could call them that, and those that have had their work pattern disrupted, you could take a 5% gap either way in terms of that agreement. So looking at management support, for example, those that are working from home, I'll call that in the broadest sense, or working away from the office, were 5% higher than the average, and those that are coming into the normal workplace were 5% lower. So one of those truisms are that the average doesn't actually tell you the true sense of where feelings were. But certainly there's a clear difference in sentiment between those that have continued to come in to their workplace and those that haven't. Overall, though, you know, we've invested a lot in the last 18 months in making sure that we keep close to the team, primarily that we keep them safe. Obviously, where you have an environment where, you know, millions of people come into your stores over the course of a year, that feeling of safety is a challenging one, and you know, it's still our primary concern as we go through. Communication can be one of those sponges that never quite gets filled and saturated. So a score in the high 70s was pleasing to us. And the scores even around work-life balance, given the stresses and strains of the pandemic at that stage, were positive too. Maybe just to go on to the next one, Marek, where we asked those people that were working from home how they were feeling about that. So this is really the group that we are most focused on in terms of how things are now and how things might be in future. So some good feedback. I guess you could look at all of these percentages and invert them, and some of them actually are quite in line with the survey results that Marek presented there. So just under 2/3 of the people that gave us feedback said that they were pretty confident they could keep a regular working schedule at home every day, not so much living in the office, but working from home. You know, that's good. People felt that they could structure that and get time not to work. You could look at the next one and say, look, almost half of people said that they couldn't maintain informal connections very well or well. It's a more even split there, and I'll come on to what we think the importance of that is as we go forward. At that stage, and actually as we've done different local surveys and we've engaged more with our team about a return to work, to a return to the office on site, it was much less confident view now. In March, the vaccination programme was still rolling out. So, you know, something has changed since then, but, you know, the very things that a lot of people said they're looking forward to coming back to the office to experience, i.e. being with their colleagues, are also the things that concern people about coming back to the office in terms of either some sort of view about vaccination status, risks there, or social distancing or health measures that would apply at the time. The bottom two data points really, I suppose, were, you know, very strong for us. Almost 2/3 of everybody that responded said that they felt their productivity had increased. There were only 4% who had noted that they felt that it had decreased. And that's one that we've explored more in terms of what people see as productivity. So you can split that into a number of different angles, I guess. We had huge, overwhelming feedback, again in line with the overall survey that Marek has presented there, that almost everybody felt that they could work effectively at home at least part of the time, and almost half of those that responded felt that they could work effectively from home all of the time. I suspect that figure has reduced very slightly in the last 6 months. Certainly detected more of a yearning for people to get time together, and there is a not an absence makes the heart grow fonder attitude at the moment, but I think people need to be reconnected to what it means to come back in and share space. So we've, maybe on the next slide, Marek, you could just go through to the, we've had an executive level steering group where we've been trying to navigate our way through the conundrum of office working. And there's a number of things that have guided us, really. One, obviously, is the ongoing advice from the executive that, as we know, is still centred on a work from home message, although now there's a softening of that to some degree in terms of, you know, employers should start to consider what they might do for a return to office. There's also been an understanding from the Department for Economy that certain companies will have to make their own calls about what work from home means and how essential another model might be. So we're mindful of that. It stood us in good stead in terms of making our teams feel safe, and that'll be our backstop still. It's hugely important that we get feedback from our teams. So we've run a variety of pulse surveys, and we've had other external surveys as well over that time, which are really insightful for us in terms of how the team are feeling about their work life in general. And then really the piece of work that we're centered on now is, what does the future look like? We've indicated Q4, so we're obviously right in the middle of that at the moment. Suspect that that's going to be something that'll be with us for the next 12 months, really, in terms of trying to answer some of these questions. So those are more fundamental questions that we're trying to address around, what is it we're actually trying to achieve here? What does good look like? What would the workplace look like to support that? And then one of the, I suppose, the sweet spots that we've had is that we've had an increasing focus over the last 4 or 5 years on transforming our business. We're a high volume, high activity, low margin business, so we work awfully hard to make profit. For every pound we sell, we're left with probably about 2 or 3 pence in that pound to reinvest. So the more you can become efficient there, that makes a lot of sense. So we've been able to ride the wave of transformation culture by focusing our business transformation forum, where we've got representatives from every part of the organization to look at proposals which would incorporate what our own colleagues are saying, also the board and leadership team views, who are the custodians of culture and change there. We've actually been working through the CIPD role analysis template as a keystone of deciding what might work where and what work actually looks like. And we've drafted and submitted for initial feedback a working framework document to our executive teams. We're right in the middle of consultation on that at the moment. I think it'll probably be mid Q1 before we'll have any firm recommendations coming out of that, and then a policy, actual practical policy on the back of that. So maybe just to flesh out those 2 final aspects, just moving on to the next slide. I guess we've taken a view, there's 4 basic ways that we work, and some of those are location dependent and some of those are people dependent. So there are times when we need to work together, we need to be in the same place and work with colleagues. There are circumstances and types of work where we actually are together but we're working on our own. Similarly, there are times whenever we can work alone and we don't need to be beside people or proximate to colleagues. And then there are times such as this when we can work together but we're apart. So that'll be a quadrant approach that we'll bring forward in working through what this looks like. And we've worked with Gartner research really to inform us around all of these frameworks. And the next slide I'm going to leave up and just explain the protocols, if you like. I know protocol is probably not a good word to use in Northern Ireland at the moment, but our future working protocols and the themes around them, and I suppose just try to explain what's behind each of the segments. I'll start with work design. The biggest one really is key to getting the design right so that we can make the rest work. So when we talk about work design, the things that we'll be looking at will be things like working hours. Again, Marek has touched on those, not just the start and stop times, but how we could facilitate non-linear days where there's an amount of work that gets done, and if it's not customer or colleague impacting, that we focus on outputs, not inputs. One of the things that we are very keen to focus on, and we're just about to implement a new workforce management system, which will allow us for the first time to actually record working time for those that aren't in the office. Again, it was a pre-pandemic project that will now bring more rewards, is to actually make sure that we've got a closer view on the time that our teams work and how much time they work, from a concern that they spend a lot more time than they're contracted to do it, and that we find some way that we can ensure downtime and off work time, both in the way we communicate, indicating that in emails, for example, but also that we actually make sure that we're not running the risk of burnout, and that excessive hours are part of a conversation around whether they're sustainable or appropriate. Obviously, working location is a key part of work design, that is both safe to work in and also secure from a business perspective. So, working from home, it's safe from an ergonomic point of view for the teams, but that we're using systems, and we've a lot of complex systems and some quite old systems in the business that require workarounds, and there's aspects around business security there that we need to think through. The aspect of blended work, as I say, we're using the CIPD template for that, looking at things around rotas, how we can use space effectively, how we use desks, whether we do that on a hot desk or an allocated desk or a booking system. And also where we do have physical meetings, all the skills that go around that, as we've eased our way out of this. I've been part of some blended meetings where we've been partly in a room, partly teams based, and there are challenges around that in terms of feeling connected as a team, allowing people that aren't in the room time to engage, and actually allow people that are in the room time to focus on each other without feeling that there are other people looking in. So that's just one based on recent experience. There could well be some contractual changes based on location and things like travel requirements. So aspects like company cars versus car allowances versus any sort of benefit, how we approach things like travel. And also then the more general, which I suppose we've adapted to tremendously. If you'd asked us 17 months ago, 18 months ago, what Teams was, none of us would have described this. But all of those meeting protocols and making sure that we run meetings effectively, that's all part of the work design stream. Rethinking the workplace segment really goes back to the previous slide around who needs to be where and when and why they need to be there. And I think we'll need to address things like personality types, introversion, extroversion, people's social needs as well as we work our way through that. I see a lot of examples in my own organisation as we've engaged our teams in returning to the office that I can see some hesitancy. I can see people's recollections of what it used to be like vary from others, and I can see people having clear views about what the consequences of a return to the office might be, and not things that would necessarily attract them back there. One thing I think we will need to focus on continually is the upskilling agenda. We've probably had the most severe jolt to our system in terms of all of the norms of the workplace have been turned on their head in the last year and a half, and we'll need to work continually around that, not just around things like teams and meetings, but also people's familiarity with systems, the training we provide, how we do that, and make sure that we don't assume that people are necessarily au fait with some of the solutions that we're bringing out, particularly in the area of digital capability. Again, some pre-existing work streams that we had before the pandemic were around things like process automation in a clerical perspective and a systems perspective, use of business intelligence tools, getting paper out of our system, and using artificial intelligence. And now we've got an opportunity to actually rethink those in a different way, because we don't expect people will will print things off as much as they would do if they were sitting beside a nice big central printer. We want people to be able to get away from Excel, and we want to be able to use systems, and we want to turn data to information and then insights as well. So there's a real opportunity there to do that. And in terms of the good work agenda, there's much more of an opportunity for people to move away from transactional work into more interpretation and decision making and strategizing. Managing the hybrid world, again, I think we're still going through this. The end point is not clear by any means, and agility is hugely important for us as an organization and how we do that. So, the aspects of teamwork, I was interested in Marek's observation about the perceived challenges in working with colleagues. I think that's one that we've certainly seen. Not being in the same space, not being able to step up from your desk and look across to a colleague and say, well, I thought you were dealing with that, or what could we do about this? We're missing that opportunity in many cases because we're not in the same space. So, a renewed focus on agile team culture around, specifying outcomes for teams, responsibilities, who does what, why they're there to do it. One aspect, I suppose, that we've had as a working model, which we can learn from, is, as I say, we've got a business model where many of our colleagues have never come into the office. And thinking of roles such as field sales or technical support out the stores, they've always had a culture of managing outcomes and KPIs and deliverables and progress against those. And I think that's going to be an increasing part of our performance reviews, of our development reviews, around how we actually define outcomes and progress towards those and support the team and individuals to get there. Well-being is a huge part of managing the hybrid world. We have certainly seen the stresses and strains both from the initial hybrid or initial panic with the pandemic. We actually did furlough many people, not just due to a downturn in some of our sectors, but also for shielding purposes. And we've really focused on providing more support there. So we've done that in a number of ways. We've increased our occupational health team. We're actually in the process of recruiting for a mental health practitioner on a permanent basis now, because that is very much first in our volume in terms of dealing with queries. But again, we've also got online facilities. We've got a wellbeing initiative called Well Aware, and there's a really good website there that everybody can get to, with lots of little sort of watch and go videos, links into other organizations that can help around, our themes of sort of move, munch, mind, and money, the 4 M's there around well-being and many factors. And that will instill confidence. That will give us an ongoing temperature check of how the team are adapting to whatever we go with. I left maintaining the culture to the end because for me, I think that is the absolute linchpin in this. It's the thing that holds it all together. And actually defining the culture is something, again, that we've been doing in recent years. We'd just at the start of 2019 launched a new set of group core values, and we've been able to come back to those in terms of what they look like. So we've simplified them, only 4 values rather than a sort of disparate set of descriptors that we'd had before. The leadership team have a huge role to play there in explaining why we're going forward in certain ways, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. So, it will center on our values. It will center around, our value of customer first, where we're customer centric. It'll center on teamwork, how cohesive we are as a great team. It'll center on ambition in terms of our ability to grow the business and make it better. And it'll also center on integrity, which is our 4th value, which is doing the right thing being fair to everyone and acting in everyone's best interests where we can. We believe we've been successful because we've been able to bring people together and we can get to know the whole person through doing that. And I think going forward, from a board perspective, that would be the single biggest loss that we would countenance in not getting a framework that continues with that. So, we're working our way to that. We're engaging with our teams. We're looking beyond productivity in terms of efficiency and looking at it in terms of effectiveness, organisation effectiveness as well. And obviously, things like company briefings, departmental updates, three-way feedback, up, down and sideways is really important to us in developing that. So I probably took a little bit more time than I should there, Marek. It was hopefully instructive, bit of a run through. Happy to pick up anything though, if anybody's got any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam. That was all very interesting and some very high praise for you in the chat box there as well from Graham as well. I think everybody can agree with that too. I'm not quite sure where the time has gone. To be honest, we only have a few minutes left. I will say again, if anybody has any other questions or comments, we can follow up after the event as well. I will not want to overrun because Lee made a promise and she doesn't like to break a promise. There is one question though, which I'm going to try and address in the time that we have left, which is from Scott, who's talking about a poll of 6,000 workers that was reported last week, which found 24% of employees say they plan to move jobs in the next 3 to 6 months. And the question was, have strong employee bonds and workplace culture been destroyed by working from home? It might be a question for you as well, Sam, but if I can, just a couple of observations to begin with. So this is what we see reported as the Great Resignation in the papers. I think, if I'm being honest, I think the jury is still out about whether this is actually something that is really happening. There is some clear statistical evidence from the US where it seems to be happening for sure, but in the UK there's still limited evidence. Now, we do actually ask some questions in this survey as well about job security. One of them includes whether you are likely to voluntarily quit your job in the next 12 months. And the percentage of people who say likely in this survey was about 18% in Northern Ireland. And that is actually roughly in line with what we have seen UK-wide and in Scotland over the last few years as well. So it's not any lower or any higher than what we have seen before. Now, of course, the caveat is this was August, today is November. It may well have changed and shifted, and maybe the findings next year will be slightly different. The truth is, though, of course, a very tight labor market where there's a lot more competition for employees. It means employers are offering better terms and conditions. So of course, it's more likely that certain employees who are maybe unhappy in their current jobs would be looking for other opportunities when the labor market is tight like this. So it may well be that this is something that is fueling. Sam, I don't know if that's. Do you have any insights from your own organization?
Yeah. Thanks, Marek. I suppose a couple of things on a practical basis. I've had some colleagues who've joined my team and have not stayed, and I absolutely know that if we weren't separated and we were in a working from home culture, those people would have been onboarded. They would have felt part of the team faster. We could have put some of the challenges in more context. I suppose that goes back to my last point about I call it the sort of secret sauce or emotional glue that binds us together. We've had a strong culture in our business of long-termism, and that includes people staying with us. And it goes back to knowing the whole person. I mean, I know if Scott and I had never had the chance to meet up in person, that I wouldn't know that he doesn't like 80s drum beats, for example, because he thinks they're too synthetic. So I'd never found that out over Teams. But on a serious note, we are social animals. Humans are. We do need levels of interaction there, and I think that is a great question, and that's the biggest risk that most organisations will face, that they can't get that connection and keep that connection with their teams.
Yes, and certainly one of the findings in this report, which I'm presenting today, is that workers who work from home all the time report poorer relationships with colleagues than those who work from home some of the time, or those who don't work from home. Well, that's when you control for things like occupation as well, etc. So it is actually working from home that is a factor here. So certainly something to keep an eye on as well. Now we have just hit 1 o'clock, I'm afraid. So I think we'll need to wrap it up there. But thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Sam, you in particular, thank you very much. I know you're a very busy man, so it's great to hear these insights from you too. Hopefully we'll have a few more events lined up around this. We certainly want to keep presenting. There's lots more data to be mined from this report, and we'll be back. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all for your comments as well. Really appreciate it.